The Great Hall of the Galactic Conclave was filled with representatives from 12 alien species. They sat in curved rows that rose like steps toward the ceiling. Lights floated in the air above them, casting a cold blue glow over everything. At the center of the room stood a single human man. Captain Daniel Shaw was tired. He had traveled for 3 weeks to reach this place, the neutral station called Meridian 7. He had come to beg for help, though the word tasted bitter in his mouth. Behind him, through the viewing windows, he could see the stars that humanity had called home for 300 years, stars they were about to lose. "The conclave recognizes the human representative," said a mechanical voice from above. Daniel stepped forward. His boots echoed in the silence. 1,000 alien eyes watched him, and not one of them held any warmth. "High members of the conclave," Daniel began, "I come before you to request protection under galactic law. For the past 50 years, the Vorath Dominion has systematically destroyed human colonies. They have blocked our trade routes. They have poisoned our relations with neutral species, and now they have given us 1 year to abandon everything we have built beyond our home system." He paused, letting the words settle. In the upper rows, he could see the Vorath delegation. Their leader, High Arbiter Krelvas, sat with his forearms crossed over his chest. His face, if you could call it that, showed something like amusement. "We have done nothing wrong," Daniel continued. "We have shared our medical technology freely. We have traded fairly. We have never started a war with any species. All we ask is the right to exist in peace." Krelvas rose from his seat. He was tall, nearly 8 feet, with gray skin that looked like stone. When he spoke, his voice came through a translator device that made it sound flat and cold. "The human speaks of peace," Krelvas said. "But what is peace to a species that breeds like insects? In 300 years, humans have spread across 40 star systems. In another 300, how many will there be? 100 systems? 1,000? Murmurs passed through the assembly. Daniel felt his heart sink. "Humanity is a disease," Krelvas continued. "A plague that consumes everything it touches. The Dominion has decided to stop this plague before it grows beyond control. The conclave would be wise to support us." Daniel looked around the room. He saw the other representatives avoiding his gaze. He saw fear in some faces, agreement in others. He understood then that the decision had already been made. This hearing was just a performance. "High Arbiter," Daniel said, keeping his voice steady. "If you do this, you will regret it. Not because we will fight you. We cannot win that fight, and we know it. But someday, you will understand what you have lost today." Krelvas laughed. It was a terrible sound, like rocks grinding together. "What will you do, human? What threat can you possibly make?" Daniel met his eyes. "No threat. Just a warning. We will leave. We will go somewhere beyond your reach. And we will remember this day. We will remember how we came here in peace and were treated like animals. We will remember every species that sat silent while our fate was decided." He turned slowly, looking at each delegation in turn. "Remember this moment," he said. "Remember that we warned you." The vote was held. 11 species voted to support the Vorath ultimatum. 1 abstained. None voted in humanity's favor. Daniel returned to Earth with the news. The reaction was not what the Vorath expected. There was no panic, no desperate last stand, no futile war. Instead, humanity began to pack. Dr. Lisa Grant worked without sleep for 6 months. She led a team of scientists who copied every piece of human knowledge into quantum storage devices. Every book ever written, every piece of music ever recorded, every scientific discovery, every work of art, every memory that could be saved, nothing would be left behind. Admiral Marcus Cole organized the evacuation fleet. 12 billion people needed to be moved, along with enough supplies to survive in unknown space. It was the largest undertaking in human history. Ships were built at a pace that should have been impossible. People who had never agreed on anything worked together with a single purpose. On the day of departure, Daniel stood on the bridge of his ship and watched Earth grow small in the viewport. Around him, 10,000 vessels moved in formation toward the edge of known space. Ahead of them lay nothing but darkness. "Captain," said his communications officer, "the Vorath are requesting a final transmission." Daniel nodded. "Put it through." Krell appeared on the screen. He was smiling, or at least making the Vorath expression that passed for a smile. "I wanted to watch you leave," he said. "I wanted to see the look on your face as you abandon your worlds." Daniel looked at him for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was calm. "Arbiter, I want you to remember something. Humans have been around for a very long time. We have survived ice ages, plagues, wars that killed millions. We have always found a way, and we have very long memories. Is that supposed to frighten me?" "No," Daniel said. "It is supposed to make you think. But I suspect you are not very good at that." He cut the transmission. Lisa Grant joined him at the viewport. She looked tired but determined. "Do you really think we can survive out there?" she asked. Daniel watched the stars ahead. Somewhere in that darkness was a new home. Somewhere was a future that the Vorath could not touch. "I think we have to," he said. "And I think someday we will come back. Not for revenge. For something better." What could be better than revenge? Daniel smiled, though there was no joy in it. Proving them wrong. Becoming something so great that they will never be able to forget what they threw away. That is the only revenge worth having. The fleet crossed the boundary of known space 3 weeks later. Behind them, the Vorath celebrated their victory. They believed the human problem was solved forever. They were wrong. 200 years passed. The galaxy forgot about humanity. Children born on Vorath worlds learned about humans the way they learned about ancient myths. Teachers told them about a primitive species that had tried to spread across the stars like weeds. The Dominion had stopped them, saved the galaxy from their endless hunger. It was a story of wisdom and strength. Chancellor Morath had heard these stories his whole life. He had risen to power, believing them completely. Humans were weak. Humans were foolish. Humans were gone. So when the first reports came from the Galactic Rim, he dismissed them. "Scout ships do not simply vanish," he told his advisors. "Find the malfunction. Punish whoever is responsible for this incompetence." But the ships kept disappearing. First one, then 3, then a dozen. They would enter a region of space near the old human border and never return. No distress calls. No wreckage. Nothing. Scout Commander Yeel was sent to investigate. She was young for a Vorath officer. Only 80 years old. She had earned her rank through talent rather than family connections, which meant she had something to prove. She took her fastest ship and her best crew into the darkness. What she found changed everything. At first, there was nothing unusual. Empty space, distant stars. The same view that scouts had seen for centuries. Then her sensors detected something that should not exist. It was a structure, floating in the void between stars. Small, perhaps the size of a shuttle, but made of materials her computer could not identify. It was clearly artificial, and it was clearly watching them. "Commander," her sensor officer said, his voice shaking. "That object has been here for at least 100 years, maybe longer." Yeel felt cold. "How can you tell?" "The dust accumulation on its surface, the radiation patterns. This thing has been sitting here, watching the border, since before any of us were born." She ordered her ship closer. As they approached, the structure came alive. Lights appeared along its surface, and a holographic image formed in front of her viewport. It was a human. Yeel had seen pictures in old history files, but those images had shown desperate refugees fleeing into the unknown. This human was different. He stood calmly, hands clasped behind his back, wearing clothes that seemed to shimmer with hidden technology. His eyes were patient. The eyes of someone who had all the time in the universe. "Hello," he said. His voice came through their communication systems without any apparent transmission. "You are the first to find me in quite some time. I am what your people might call a watcher." Yeel tried to speak, but her throat was dry. She swallowed and tried again. "Who are you? What is this place?" The Watcher smiled. "I am a reminder, and this place is a boundary. You have been observed for 200 years, Commander. Everything you have done, every ship you have sent, every signal you have broadcast. We have watched it all. We? You mean humans? I mean the descendants of the people you drove away. We wanted you to know that we never forgot. We never stopped watching. And we have been very busy." He made a small gesture, and coordinates appeared on her navigation display. "Go there," he said. "See what we have become. Then return to your Chancellor and tell him that the silence is ending." The structure folded in on itself and vanished. One moment it was there, the next it was gone, leaving no trace of how it had moved or where it had gone. Yeel stared at the empty space for a long time. Then she ordered her navigator to follow the coordinates. The journey took 2 days at maximum speed. When they arrived, Yeel understood why the Watcher had smiled. Before her was a star, but not like any star she had seen. It was surrounded by a shell of structures, millions of them, each one larger than the greatest Vorath station. They were harvesting the star's energy, collecting more power in a single day than the entire Dominion used in a year. And beyond the shell, she could see ships. Thousands of ships, perhaps millions, moving in patterns that suggested a civilization so vast she could not comprehend it. "Commander," her sensor officer whispered. "Their smallest vessel is larger than our biggest warship." Yeel said nothing. She was remembering the stories she had been told as a child. Weak, foolish, gone. The stories had been wrong. She returned to Kethera Prime and requested an immediate audience with Chancellor Morath. He kept her waiting for 3 days, a reminder of her low status. When she finally stood before him, she told him everything. Morath listened with growing anger. When she finished, he slammed his upper fists against his throne. "Lies," he said. "Impossible lies. Humans could not have advanced so far in 2 centuries. Our scientists say it would take them 1,000 years to match our technology, if they survived at all. Chancellor, I saw it with my own eyes. My ship recorded everything. Then your ship was fooled. Some trick, some illusion. I will not believe that those primitive creatures have surpassed us." Yeel wanted to argue, but she saw the fear in his eyes. He was not refusing to believe because he thought she was wrong. He was refusing because he was afraid she was right. She bowed and left the chamber. That night, she sat alone in her quarters and accessed the ancient historical archives. She found files that had not been opened in 200 years. Records from the time of the human exile. She read about human history, their wars and disasters and recoveries. She read about what they called the survival instinct. And she read the last transmission from the human captain, the one called Daniel Shaw. "We will remember this day. We will remember how we came here in peace and were treated like animals." Yeel closed the file and stared at the wall. Somewhere, in the darkness beyond the rim, humanity was watching, waiting. She wondered how much longer the waiting would last. The problem started slowly. So slowly that no one noticed at first. On the agricultural world of Vethan 3, farmers reported that their crops were growing strangely. The plants looked healthy, but when harvested, the food had no nutritional value. Scientists investigated and found that the soil had been altered at the molecular level. Something had changed its basic structure, making it useless for growing food. No one knew how it had happened. No one had seen anything suspicious. The change had occurred sometime during the night, across the entire planet, without a single alarm being triggered. Then the mining operations began to fail. Equipment that had worked perfectly for decades suddenly stopped functioning. The machines were not broken exactly, but their parts no longer fit together correctly. Measurements that had been precise were now slightly wrong, just enough to make everything fail. Communication networks developed strange delays. Messages would arrive seconds late, then minutes late, then not at all. Engineers rebuilt entire systems, but the problems continued. It was as if the technology itself had decided to stop cooperating. Chancellor Morath blamed sabotage, then incompetence, then bad luck. He refused to connect these events to Yiel's report about the humans. That report had been classified and buried. Anyone who mentioned it disappeared from public positions. But the Dominion's economy was collapsing, and no amount of denial could stop it. Then Ambassador Tyla arrived. She came in a ship that made no sense. It was small, no larger than a personal transport, but it crossed from the Galactic Rim to Cathara Prime in 3 hours. A journey that should have taken weeks. When Vorath scanners tried to analyze the vessel, their instruments returned nothing. It was as if the ship did not exist. Tyla was human, but like the Watcher, she seemed different from the images in old records. She was calm in a way that suggested absolute confidence. She moved through the Vorath capital, as if she belonged there. As if she had always belonged there. The conclave gathered to meet her. Representatives from all 12 Dominion species sat in the same hall where Daniel Shaw had been condemned 2 centuries earlier. They watched as this small human woman walked to the center of the room. "I bring greetings from the Human Coalition," she said. Her voice was soft, but it carried clearly to every corner of the chamber. "We wish to discuss our return to galactic society." Chancellor Morath leaned forward. "Return? You were exiled. You have no right to return." Tyla smiled. "Exiled? I think you may want to review your history, Chancellor. My ancestors were given a choice. Leave voluntarily, or be exterminated. They chose to leave. No law was broken. No treaty was violated. We simply went elsewhere. And now you want to come back. We want to be treated as equals. Nothing more, nothing less." A Kreth representative stood. "Why should we negotiate with you? What leverage do you have?" Tyla turned to face him. "Do you know why your crops are failing? Why your machines no longer work? Why your communications are unreliable?" The chamber went silent. "We have spent 200 years developing technologies you cannot imagine," Tyla continued. "We have been inside your systems for decades, placing devices so small your best instruments cannot detect them. We have mapped every network, every database, every defense grid in the Dominion." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "We could have destroyed you at any time. We could have turned your weapons against you, collapsed your economies overnight, left your worlds dark and helpless. We chose not to. Do you understand what that means?" Chancellor Morath's face had gone pale. "You are threatening us." "No, Chancellor, I am offering you a gift. The gift of knowing that when we had the power to be cruel, we chose to be patient instead. We are not here for revenge. We are here for recognition." She activated a display that appeared in the air before them. It showed human achievements over the past 2 centuries. Ships that traveled faster than light, using principles the Vorath had never discovered. Medical technology that had eliminated disease and extended human lifespans beyond 300 years. Cities that floated in space, powered by stars they had tamed. "This is what we became," Tyla said. "Not because we wanted to prove ourselves superior, but because we had nothing else to do. You took everything from us. Our homes, our history, our place in the galaxy. All we had left was time and determination." Admiral Elena Vance watched the proceedings from orbit aboard her flagship, the Constellation. She was the commander of the Human Reclamation Fleet, though that name was more symbolic than literal. Humanity did not need to reclaim anything by force. They had already won without firing a shot. Dr. Nathan Cross stood beside her, monitoring the devices they had placed throughout Dominion space. With a single command, he could shut down everything. Power grids, transportation networks, life support systems on space stations. The Vorath would be helpless. "Do you think they will accept?" Elena asked. Nathan shook his head. "No, they are too proud. Morath will refuse, and then we will have to show them what we can really do." I was hoping it would not come to that. So was I. But some lessons can only be learned the hard way. In the chamber below, Chancellor Morath had recovered his composure. He stood, drawing himself up to his full height. "The Dominion does not negotiate with lesser species," he declared. We do not bow to threats. Whatever tricks you have played, they will not save you when our fleets come for your hidden worlds. Tyla nodded slowly. I expected this answer. I had hoped for better, but I expected this. She turned to leave, then paused. You have 1 week to reconsider. After that, we will proceed to the next phase. What next phase? She looked back at him with something that might have been sadness. The phase where we stop being patient. 1 week later, every piece of technology in the Vorath Dominion stopped working. Ships drifted powerless in space. Defense satellites went dark. Hospitals lost power. Cities fell silent. Humanity had not fired a single weapon. They had simply turned off the lights. And in the darkness, the Dominion finally began to understand what they had created. The Vorath expected death. They expected human warships to appear in their skies, raining fire on their cities. They expected payback for 2 centuries of hatred. Instead, the lights came back on in the hospitals first. Captain Daniel Shaw VII led the first humanitarian mission to Cathara Prime. He was the 7th generation of his family to bear that name, and he carried his ancestors' journals everywhere he went. The original Daniel Shaw had written those words during the Exodus, recording his thoughts as humanity fled into the unknown. Now his descendant was returning, not as a conqueror, but as something else entirely. We have medical supplies for 3 million patients, Daniel announced as his shuttle landed. Our doctors are ready to assist your hospitals. We ask only that you allow us to help. The Vorath officials who met him were stunned. They had prepared for invasion, not mercy. They did not know how to respond. Why? Asked one of them. An elderly administrator named Vethus. Why would you help us after what we did to your people? Daniel reached into his bag and pulled out a worn book. The pages were yellow with age, but the writing was still clear. My ancestor wrote this the night before your people drove us away, he said. He wrote, they want us to become monsters. That is the final victory they want. To make us as cruel as they are. I will not give them that. He closed the book gently. We spent 200 years deciding what kind of people we wanted to be. We chose not to be defined by what was done to us. We chose to be defined by what we do. The humanitarian mission spread across Dominion space. Human engineers restored power to civilian areas, while leaving military installations dark. Human doctors treated the sick and injured without asking about species or politics. Human ships delivered food to worlds where the crops had failed. Not everyone was grateful. General Morath, the Chancellor's son, led a resistance movement that refused to accept human help. He called it an occupation, a trick, a new form of conquest. His followers attacked human aid workers, burned supply depots, and broadcast messages calling for war. On the colony world of Perith IV, they succeeded in destroying a human medical station. 37 doctors and nurses died, along with 200 Vorath patients who had been receiving treatment. Admiral Elena Vance received the news aboard the Constellation. Her first officer, a man named Samuel Torres, stood beside her as the casualty reports came in. We should respond, he said quietly. We have the power to wipe out every resistance base in the Dominion. One order, and this ends. Elena stared at the screen, showing the destroyed medical station. She had known some of those doctors personally. They had volunteered for this mission knowing the risks. And then what? She asked. We kill a few thousand Vorath fighters, and then a few thousand more rise to take their place. We become exactly what they expected us to be. We cannot let this go unpunished. It will not go unpunished. But punishment and revenge are not the same thing. She recorded a message and broadcast it across all frequencies, human and Vorath alike. Today, we lost 37 of our people. They died helping others, which is the best death any of us can hope for. We mourn them, and we will not forget them. But we will not answer hate with hate. The people who did this will face justice, real justice, through a fair process that proves we are better than our worst impulses. She paused, composing herself. To the Vorath people, I want to say this. We did not come here for revenge. We came here because turning away from suffering is not who we are. Even when the suffering is among those who hurt us, we will not stop helping you because of what a few extremists have done. That would mean letting hatred win. Krell Voss the Younger watched the broadcast from his hiding place in the old capital. He was the grandson of the High Arbiter who had condemned humanity 2 centuries ago. His whole life, he had lived with that legacy, wondering what kind of man his grandfather had truly been. Now he was beginning to understand. He found Daniel Shaw VII at a refugee camp outside the city. The human captain was helping to distribute food, working alongside Vorath volunteers who had chosen cooperation over resistance. "Why did you come to find me?" Daniel asked, when Krell Voss approached. "Because I need to understand." Krell Voss struggled for words. "Your people have every right to hate us, every right to destroy us. Instead, you are kind. It does not make sense." Daniel set down the supplies he was carrying and faced the Vorath directly. "Let me ask you something. If we had come here with weapons, if we had burned your cities and enslaved your people, what would you have done?" "We would have fought. We would have resisted until the last of us was dead. And your children? Your grandchildren? Would they have forgiven us?" "Never," Daniel nodded. "So, revenge would have bought us nothing except eternal enemies. We would have spent the next 1,000 years looking over our shoulders, waiting for the next uprising, the next assassination, the next war. Is that the future we should want?" Krell Voss was silent for a long moment. Then he asked, "What do you want instead?" "We want what your grandfather took from us. A place in the galaxy. Neighbors who do not fear us. The chance to build something better than what came before." Daniel picked up the supplies again. "Revenge is easy. It feels good for a moment, and then it poisons everything it touches. We decided a long time ago that we would rather be happy than satisfied." That night, Krell Voss broadcast his own message. It was the first public apology from any member of the original Arbiter's family. "My grandfather was wrong," he said simply. He was afraid of something he did not understand, and his fear led him to do a terrible thing. "I cannot change the past, but I can say clearly that what was done to humanity was unjust. I am sorry. I know that words are not enough, but they are all I have to offer." The message spread across the Dominion. It did not end the resistance overnight, but it began something important. It began the process of healing, and somewhere in the human fleet, Admiral Vance allowed herself a small smile. This was the victory worth having. Not conquest. Not destruction. Understanding. 5 years had passed since the day the lights went out across the Dominion. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The Vorath Dominion no longer existed. Its 12-member species had gone their separate ways, forming new alliances and new relationships with their neighbors. Some had embraced cooperation with humanity eagerly, others remained suspicious, watching from a distance, waiting to see what would happen next. The Galactic Conclave had been rebuilt from the ground up. This time, humanity was not a petitioner standing alone in the center of the chamber. This time, humans sat among the other species as founding members of a new order. President Maya Torres stood at the podium, looking out at representatives from 100 worlds. She was the first human to hold this position, elected by a coalition that crossed species boundaries. Her speech would be broadcast to trillions of beings across the galaxy. 205 years ago, she began. My ancestors stood in a room very much like this one. They came in peace, asking only to be treated with dignity. They were denied. They were told they were worthless, primitive, undeserving of a place among the stars. She paused, letting the silence stretch. They could have spent the next 2 centuries planning revenge. They could have built weapons instead of wonders. They could have taught their children to hate, passing down the anger from generation to generation until it consumed everything they were. Her voice grew stronger. Instead, they built universities. They built hospitals. They built art galleries and concert halls and libraries filled with the knowledge of 1,000 worlds. They raised children who learned that strength is not the ability to destroy. Strength is the ability to choose not to. She looked directly at the Vorath delegation, where Krell Voss the Younger sat among the representatives. We returned not to punish, but to prove something. Not to you. To ourselves. We needed to know that we could face our worst memories and still choose hope over hatred. We needed to know that the darkness of the past did not have to define our future. In the audience, Ambassador Tyla watched with quiet pride. She had spent 5 years working toward this moment, negotiating treaties and resolving conflicts, and slowly building the trust that made this new conclave possible. Beside her sat Daniel Shaw 7, his ancestors' journal still in his pocket. He had read those words so many times that he knew them by heart. Now he was watching them come true. The ceremony continued with the trial of former Chancellor Morath. He was not being judged for the crimes of his predecessors. Those crimes were too old, too distant, involving people who had died centuries ago. Instead, he faced charges for ordering the attack on the medical station, for suppressing evidence of atrocities, for actions taken during his own time in power. The trial was fair. Morath was given lawyers, allowed to present evidence, permitted to speak in his own defense. In the end, he was found guilty and sentenced to spend the rest of his life in a rehabilitation facility, where he would be treated humanely, but never allowed to hold power again. It was not vengeance, it was justice, and there was a difference. After the trial, Krell Voss approached Maya Torres. "I have something to say," he told her. "Something I should have said long ago." She nodded for him to continue. "My grandfather believed he was protecting the galaxy from a threat. He believed humans were dangerous because you were different, because you grew quickly, because you did not think the way we thought. He was afraid of what you might become." Krell Voss took a deep breath. He was right to be afraid. But not for the reasons he imagined. You were dangerous because you refused to be what we expected. You refused to be cruel when cruelty was deserved. You refused to be vengeful when vengeance was justified. You showed us a way of being that we did not know was possible. He bowed his head. "I am sorry for what my family did to yours. I am sorry for 200 years of suffering. I know these words cannot undo the past, but I hope they can help build a better future." Maya placed her hand on his arm. "That is all any of us can do. Build something better than what came before." On Earth, the celebrations lasted for days. The planet had been restored to its former beauty and beyond. Forests had grown back. Oceans had been cleaned. Cities had been rebuilt with technologies that seemed like magic. The world that had once been humanity's prison was now a monument to what perseverance could achieve. In the rebuilt city of Chicago, a new museum opened its doors. It was dedicated to the history of the exile, preserving the stories of those who had fled and those who had stayed behind. Children of all species came to learn about what had happened and about the choices that had shaped the galaxy. The final room of the museum contained a single display: the original journal of Captain Daniel Shaw, the first of his name. Visitors could read his words, written on the night before humanity left everything behind. "Someday, they will know what they lost. Not because we will hurt them, but because we will show them what we could have built together. The best revenge is not destruction. It is becoming something so magnificent that they can never forget what they threw away." Outside the museum, in a park filled with trees from a dozen worlds, a human child played with a young Vorath. They chased each other through the grass, laughing in languages that their great-grandparents would not have understood. Their parents watched from nearby benches, making small talk about weather and food, and the ordinary concerns of daily life. No one watching them would have known about the centuries of hatred that had come before. No one would have guessed that these two species had once been enemies. That was the point. Humanity had been driven away. They had warned their persecutors that consequences would come, and the consequences had arrived, but not as fire and blood, not as the destruction that everyone expected. The consequences were mercy, understanding, a second chance that the Vorath had never deserved but humanity had given them anyway, because that was what being human meant. Not perfection, not superiority, just the stubborn refusal to let the worst parts of history determine the future. The stars still shone above the park in Chicago. Somewhere among them, ships traveled between worlds, carrying people of every species toward destinations that their ancestors could not have imagined. The exile was over. The silence had ended. And the dawn of something new had finally begun.